Hello, thank you for attending this tutorial. My name is Lara Strickland. Now you might find it helpful to have some documents to hand as you attend this tutorial. So for instance, the module overview, which was emailed to you, but is also appended as an announcement. Equally, two documents provided as an announcement: the project proposal and plan template, and the supervisory feedback policy for this module. If you'd like to obtain these documents, simply pause the recording and come back when you have them to hand. So what will I be covering during this tutorial? I'd like to bring to your attention the learning outcomes for the module. It's important at the start of any module to understand what is required of you with regard to assessment and what the marking criteria are. It's important to know what the end game is as you commence your journey. I'd also like to cover peer and self-assessment, the supervisory feedback policy on this module, and then we'll have a look at the purpose of the preparatory work and the fact that your application for ethical approval is on the critical path. We'll talk about module supervision and delivery, the tutorial schedule, and we'll also talk about work-based learning and action research. I want to touch upon stakeholder engagement, and then we will conclude with the importance of managing your time effectively, and then I will provide an overview of all the key deadlines. Now, there are a lot of slides. I do not intend doing death by PowerPoint. The intention is that these slides are useful prompts of material that you will be studying during the course of this module, and also that they will be a useful aide-memoire during the next 4 or 5 months or so. So why are the learning outcomes important? The module is written based upon the learning outcomes, and so too is your assessment based upon the learning outcomes. So these are the foundations of the module itself and of your assessment. So it's really important that you understand these and have these to hand. When we talk about applying for ethical approval, you will see that it's really important that you demonstrate alignment with these learning outcomes in your application. In particular, learning outcome 1 is critical in this regard. As you can read on the slide, learning outcome 1 is that you need to critically evaluate entrepreneurial opportunities and practices from the perspective of different communities of practice in order to develop a case study for why an issue is worthy of investigation. Now, the module and the tutorials are going to help you address each of these learning outcomes. So, for example, with regard to learning outcome 2, in this first tutorial, we're going to start talking about research approaches. It will be covered in more detail in subsequent tutorials, and is addressed in the online module material, as well as you have a variety of textbooks to help you. You can see that there are 3 further learning outcomes linked to the intellectual, practical, effective and transferable skills. Now, in terms of learning outcome 4, critically reflecting upon your own experiences of undertaking a major project and how this compares to theories and concepts in the academic and grade literature, what I would say is that in traditional research, traditional academic research, one of the key requisites is to identify a gap in the research and to plug this so that you are adding a new body of research to the academic research community. When we talk about the concept of work-based learning and action research in more detail later on in this tutorial, you will see that here that effectively, rather than plugging a gap in the academic research per se, what you are doing is identifying an opportunity or an issue, so that is your gap, within your work context. The idea being to add value to the organisation, and by default to key stakeholders within the organisation, such as customers. You will, like traditional academic research, you will undertake a literature review, so you will be drawing upon, as well as the module material and the core textbooks, you will also be identifying literature that is specific to your own organisational context. This may be academic literature, it may also be what we call grade literature. So for example, government white papers, journals and articles relevant to your industry or sector, and so forth. And then you can see the final learning outcome, by all accounts, relates to the final submission of your project report. But equally, the ability to communicate effectively is inferred in learning outcome 5, and that's going to be particularly critical in terms of your stakeholder engagement. So your assessment is due on the 27th of September. I know that seems like a long way off, but you have an awful lot to do. And that is why we have started you on this module early. Your final submission is a 10,000 word action research project that you submit on Turnitin. Now, over the course of the module, I will be providing you with lots of guidance and support in the teaching announcements. So, for example, in due course, not necessarily from the outset, I will be providing you with extracts from previously submitted reports as vehicles for teaching. Now, you need to focus upon an organisation of your choice for this project, which ideally should be where you work. Irrespective of the organisation you select to focus upon, it is imperative that you have a discussion with your supervisor about your proposed organisation and focus of your research, because they will need to approve this. And this, I suggest you gain their approval before you get too far gone with your ethical approval. Now there is also a formative submission, which is your project proposal and plan, which you also submit to Turnitin. It is a mandatory assessment, and it contributes to the final mark. The final mark will only be communicated to you, however, as part of your final action research project. Now, the project proposal and plan, the template, was one of those documents that are suggested to you at the outset that you might find it useful to have to hand and briefly review. The deadline, as you can see here, is Friday the 19th of July. The deadline for both submissions is by 13:59, and critically UK time, please. You should also be aware of the as well as being aware of the learning outcomes for the module, you should also be aware of the marking criteria. So I've detailed the marking criteria here for you on the slide. What you might like to do is have a detailed read of the assignment question itself and the marking criteria. Now, I'm not going to read through each of the marking criteria in detail. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples here. So for instance, in respect of entrepreneurial opportunity, you need to provide clear justification of the value of the idea, opportunity, or issue worthy of investigation, and subsequent implementation, addressing to the appropriate community of practice or indeed stakeholder group. Additionally, you should demonstrate that your project objectives and scope are realistic in terms of the time available and within your sphere of influence as the researcher. You need to develop a project plan, which it is well worth developing one now to ensure completion within the identified timescales. And as you will have seen, you do submit a project plan and proposal to your supervisor via Turnitin by the 19th of July. Finally, you need to evidence management of the project from the idea or opportunity to action. So you need to make a difference within the organisation, adding value. Now I'm just going to touch upon the marking criteria number 3, which is community of practice. So what is required here? You need to demonstrate engagement with key stakeholders to identify ideas, opportunities or issues, and to agree on researching and implementing / addressing one where the value can be evidenced. You also need to demonstrate acquisition of support and resources to undertake relevant research and to ensure successful implementation of the idea or indeed opportunity or addressing the issue. So again, I would refer you to the detailed marking criteria so that you can gain an appreciation at the outset of what is required in your final project report. I just also want to touch upon the marking criteria number 4, which is the use of the literature / sources. So what is required here? You need to ensure that you explicitly apply the entrepreneurial action module material, making use of core readings and the textbooks within the reading list to underpin your research and aid analysis. And we talked about the need to ensure that you undertake some further academic reading relevant to your organisational context and identify the relevant grey literature as well. We need to see some evidence of critical thinking in the application of the literature in practice. So what do we mean by critical thinking? Well, in terms of the literature you have sourced, what insights does it provide? Justify the insights, justify what fits, and explain why that is the case. Where your reading is not that helpful, where you can't see such alignment or fit, evidence why this is the case, and what new ideas might it generate? Where might that direct you towards? And what does that mean for your research? Now, I think it's worth talking about the project plan and proposal in more detail. It is only due by the 19th of July, but like I said at the start of this tutorial, it's important for you to understand what the end game is, and as part of that, what is your critical path and key milestones, along with achieving ethical approval for your action research project. Submitting a project plan and proposal is also on your critical path. As you saw from the marking criteria, you can earn up to 15 marks for submission of this project plan and proposal. But the 15 marks is not just for the submission in July. It's broken down into a number of components. So let's talk through this slide in more detail. In the first instance, you should arrange yourselves into groups within your supervisory group, and you should peer review another student's project proposal and plan, providing them with some feedback to try and help them. We talked about critical analysis in providing formative feedback, in identifying what might help them, what they might do differently. This is a form of critical analysis. You should determine your own dates for peer review. I've just seen I've spelled review incorrectly. Okay, too late now. Noting that the deadline to the supervisor is via Turnitin on Friday the 19th of July. Now, in your submission to your supervisor, you need to evidence how the peer review feedback was addressed. And equally, you should share your rationale for dismissing any feedback. Now, critically, in the submission of your final project report in September, you need to include two things. One is an appendix highlighting how the supervisor's feedback on your project proposal and plan was addressed, or indeed why some feedback might have been dismissed. And you should also append the actual project plan and proposal that you submitted to your supervisor. And marks are only provided in the final submission. So some points on peer assessment. We're going to talk about ethical application in a moment, but you are required to peer review each other's ethical application forms, which is effectively a bundle of documents, providing feedback to another student to help them. So the deadline to provide your ethical application and bundle of documents to another student is Thursday the 11th of April, and the deadline for feedback is Monday the 15th of April. And then in terms of the project proposal and plan peer review, you need to make sure that you provide feedback in time such that you can act upon it, so that you can meet the deadline to your supervisor of Friday the 19th of July. Now there is also some self-assessment on this module. We require you to undertake some self-assessment on your completed action research report. Now the deadline for submission of your draft report to your supervisor for feedback is Friday the 6th of September. Now, if you want some feedback from your supervisor, it is critical that you provide a self-assessment of the entire draft against the marking criteria, which we've just spoken about, and this should be attached as an appendix. A template will be provided to you in the form of an announcement. Now, this self-assessment will help indicate to the student what questions or concerns they might have, thus directing their supervisor's feedback within the 20% limit. So supervisors are only allowed to comment upon up to 20% of any chapters or indeed of your final draft of your action research project. The draft should be emailed to your supervisor with the email explaining, based on your self-assessment, which should be appended where you want your supervisor to focus their feedback. If you do not comply with all of the above, no feedback will be provided. Now, whilst I'm giving you some guidance here on assessment, that does not in any way preclude you from accessing the detailed assessment details and marking criteria on the learning management system, i.e. Canvas. These slides are only intended to provide you with a synopsis of what is required. Now, I'd like to bring to your attention the supervisory feedback policy on this module, which is based upon the university's recently issued policy on draft student work. Your supervisor will review your ethical application once, and they will provide you with formative feedback. Note that your ethical application should already have been peer reviewed, and you should have acted on this feedback before you submit your draft to your supervisor by Thursday the 18th of April. Whilst I say draft, it must be a fully completed bundle of documents. It is a draft insofar as it is not the final version that is submitted to the Ethics Committee. This you submit to your supervisor via email. In terms of your project proposal and plan, once again, your supervisor will only review this once, providing formative feedback. And this should have, like your ethical application, have been peer reviewed and you should have acted on the feedback, or indeed considered and acted on the feedback you feel appropriate to do so from your peer. As I said in the earlier slide, your supervisor will only review 20% of your final project report, with you directing the focus of the feedback based on the self-assessment we have already talked about. Now, your supervisor will review final draft chapters once, again with you, the student, directing the focus of the feedback. There is again a 20% limit. By final draft chapter, what I mean is that you should not be submitting incomplete work to your supervisor. So if you want to submit your literature review or your research methodology chapter to your supervisor for comment, please do, but it must be a fully completed chapter, albeit it is a draft insofar as it may not be the final version incorporated within your project report. Now, you should note that this policy does not preclude regular discussion between each student and their supervisor. As you can see detailed on the slide, whilst your supervisors will be proactive, they will not repeatedly chase you. You are, as postgraduate students, self-directed learners and must be equally proactive. Finally, it should be pointed out that the final mark for this final assessment, the summative assessment, which is the submission of your final project report, cannot in any way be inferred from any comments relating to draft work that your supervisor has provided you with. So what are the module requirements? In undertaking your project, you are expected to source your own idea, opportunity or issue worthy of investigation. As I've said earlier, you need to sign the organisational context and the idea, opportunity or issue off with your named supervisor. You need to demonstrate the project's value to the appropriate community of practice or otherwise stakeholder group. You need to develop a project plan to ensure timely completion. You need to ensure that you acquire the resources required to deliver the project. And by all accounts, you need to consider the extent to which the project is within your sphere of influence in terms of acquiring resources. You need to manage the project from idea to action. So we're looking at implementing your idea, opportunity, or how you might address the issue to add value. And you need to reflect on the outcomes against key themes in the academic and grey literature with regard to entrepreneurship. Now, in terms of your application for ethical approval, students undertaking major project modules such as this, which involves research, so it's action research, which we will talk about in a moment, which will also involve the collection of data, must comply with Anglia Ruskin's ethical approval requirements. Your application for ethical approval, as you will know from our written communications to you as early as January of this year, is on the critical path. You can't undertake any research for your project until this approval has been formally granted by the Ethical Approval Committee. So let's just recap on what the purpose of this preparatory work is, these preparatory study weeks that I wrote to you about in January. To submit your ethical application, you need to have achieved a number of things. Firstly, a sound appreciation of the taught academic content of the module, so that is entrepreneurial action, so that you can give careful consideration to your project focus. You need to have engaged with the appropriate stakeholders to agree the project focus. Finally, you also need to have developed an understanding of research methods and more generally, you need to have developed an understanding of research methods more generally so that in your application you can outline your proposed research methodology. Let us look at preparatory weeks 1 to 3. So in this first week, you need to be reading the module introduction. You need to familiarise yourself with the assessment to include the marking criteria, also the learning outcomes, and you need to be reading topics 1 and 2, which address action research and research ethics, respectively. In preparatory week 2, we commence in the 25th of March. Your focus is on topics 3 and 4, which address research methods and entrepreneurship, respectively. And then in the third week, topics 5 and 6 address the entrepreneurial action process, and topic 6, opportunity identification. You will see that in weeks 2 and 3 there are some additional resources, namely the Entrepreneurial Creativity Toolkit and the Business Model Canvas. In week 4, you'll be looking at personal and organisational entrepreneurship. You'll undertake a self-assessment relating to your entrepreneurial competency, and you will continue to identify possible opportunities and engage with stakeholders, considering who is likely to participate in your creative problem-solving workshop. Week 5, you will note the deadline for submission of your ethical application bundle to your supervisor, Thursday the 11th of April. As we spoke about earlier, you submit your bundle to a peer student for review by Thursday the 11th of April, with feedback provided by the 15th of April. And during this week, you will also read topic 8, which focuses on the literature review. Preparatory week 6, you'll receive initial feedback from your supervisor on your ethics application, and you need to address this feedback to ensure that you are able to return it to them with all of the amendments made by the following week. So Thursday the 2nd of May is the deadline for submission of your ethical approval application, your bundle of documents to your supervisor via email, and they will submit it to the ethics committee the next day. If you haven't addressed the feedback your supervisor has provided you with, and you haven't provided good reason for not addressing the feedback, the supervisor will simply submit your proposal to the ethics committee, and if it is not of a standard to be granted ethical approval, you won't be granted ethical approval. So back to the fact that you are self-directed learners, you need to conscientiously write up your ethical application, pulling together the various bundle of documents, and you should attend carefully to feedback provided by a peer student and by your supervisor. So what is left to study? You've got topic 9, which addresses research design, and topic 10, which is data collection and analysis. So applying for ethical approval. What is included or what needs to be included in what I have referred to as your bundle of documents? Firstly, it's imperative that you undertake the compulsory training. So you need to attach a screenshot of this as part of your bundle of documents. You need to provide a gatekeeper permission letter, providing permission to undertake the research. Naturally, you need to include the ethics application form. You also need to have provided a participant information sheet and consent form that is relevant to the research you are undertaking. The university does provide you with templates for these participant information sheets and consent forms. The pass mark for the compulsory training is 70%. Multiple attempts are permitted. In your research application form, you must clearly evidence that you are addressing the learning outcomes via your research. I alluded to this earlier when we discussed the learning outcomes. In particular, you need to ensure that you demonstrate that you are addressing learning outcome 1. A populated template of the research ethics application form is provided to help you on the right path in this regard. Your gatekeeper permission letter must be on official letter-headed paper with a signature. More detailed guidance will be provided in the announcements. Here I am just signposting the key points that you will need to attend to. So what are the ethical approval deadlines? The 11th of April, submission of your fully completed bundle of documents to your peer. And by Monday, the 15th of April, all students should have received feedback from their peer. Having addressed the feedback provided by a peer student, you need to submit your bundle of documents to your supervisor by the 13th of April, and you will receive feedback from your supervisor by the 25th. You then have a week to address the feedback provided by your supervisor. So Thursday, the 2nd of May, you need to ensure you've sent your final revised bundle of documents to your supervisor via email, and they will submit it to the ethics committee the following day. At the beginning of June, providing the ethics committee has granted approval, your research may proceed. You will receive a communication indicating whether or not approval has been granted. Again, note all dates are UK time, please. Now, you have lots of resources to help you with regard to applying for ethical approval. Topic 2 deals with research ethics. There is the Lord Ashcroft International Business School Research Ethics website. I've provided the link for this at the bottom of the slide. You've got the compulsory training which you need to undertake, which we've already talked about. The research application form, it has been populated, the template has been populated, with some examples of how you might use a theory to evidence alignment of your research focus with the learning outcomes, in particular learning outcome 1. And you've got templates for the participant information sheet, consent form, and also the gatekeeper letter. There is also a document detailing the ethics clearance process, which will be provided to you via an announcement. If you can hear a noise in the background, hopefully not, that is my dog barking. I guess that is the postman, or he can hear another dog in the street. So you've also got your fellow students or a fellow student as a resource, because they will peer review your fully completed application of documents. And then you've also got your supervisor, who will provide you with feedback as well, having revised your bundle of documents. So some ethical considerations. Now, for those students that might be working in healthcare, it is imperative that you obtain written approval from your internal ethics committee agreeing to the research. And this must be submitted as part of your bundle of documents to Anglia Ruskin University for approval. If you work in healthcare, please can you flag this to your named supervisor as a matter of priority. Students that are based in the UK that work in a healthcare environment, please access this link below that will indicate whether or not you require ethical approval from the NHS, and you need to screenshot your completion of this tool and the outcome, which we are presuming would be you do not need further ethical approval from the NHS. If the online tool says you do need further ethical approval, please talk with your named supervisor as a matter of urgency to discuss your project focus and whether or not you need to amend this. So if you work in healthcare, early consideration of these is important, and you need to have early dialogue with your supervisor, please. We do have a couple of military students in the group. They will be working with Martin Spall, and you will be wanting to avoid projects that might address security issues, such as requiring question 22 to be ticked. I will show you what question 22 is in a moment. And we would expect typically for military students that question 19, so red question 19, would be ticked. In terms of research topics, all students should be sensitive to the focus that they are going to undertake for their research, and should avoid research that includes focusing upon vulnerable people and youths, which is likely, if you focus upon this sort of area, will create a lot of extra work and a lot of hoops to jump through. So avoid such focus, such sensitive research. Right, so I've just provided in the slides that follow screenshots of the research ethics checklist, which appears in your ethics application form. And as you can see, I'm suggesting here you need to avoid research which ticks red boxes in this checklist, albeit we've already recognised that military students, typically their research will tick question 19. So you can see red research commences with question 12. I won't read these to you, but really anybody working within biosciences, genetics, medicine, I mean, this is a business degree, so we're not focusing upon this sort of research. So it would be, yes, we'd be very surprised if those questions were ticked. So for the military students, we said that we'd expect question 19 to be ticked as a yes. So relate to military sites, personnel, equipment, or the defence industry. But we want military students to avoid the need to tick question 22. Any project of that nature is highly sensitive, confidential, and it is not appropriate from an organisational or university perspective for this module. Healthcare students, note question 24. That's purple. Does your research involve the NHS? And if you aren't based in the UK, but you work in healthcare, so in England, the NHS stands for the National Health Service. So if you aren't based in the UK and you work in healthcare, as I said earlier, you need to secure written ethical approval from your ethics committee giving permission for your research. Right, let's talk for a moment about module delivery and supervision. I introduced myself at the start of this tutorial. My name is Lara Strickland, and I, alongside with the module leader, Chris Kerry, wrote to you in January. I will be providing group-wide teaching announcements, which you will all have access to. It's imperative that you read these regularly. You will find that one, if not two or three announcements may appear per week. And I, like this tutorial, will be recording tutorials for you to access at a time that is convenient to you. But there are specified weeks that you should be listening to the recorded tutorials. So for instance, this first tutorial, you should be listening in study week preparatory 1, which is week commencing the 18th of March. Now there are 6 supervisors supervising you in regard of your projects. I am one of those 6 supervisors as well. Each of the supervisors will have their own individual supervisory space within Canvas that only the students within their group can access. Now, I must point out to you that because we are starting this module early, we are using a temporary Canvas space at the moment. So you won't have the individual supervisory space until the end of March, beginning of April. We will migrate all the announcements I've made to the permanent Canvas space once we have access to it. We will migrate the online learning material. The only thing we won't be able to migrate is any discussions. Now, your individual supervisors will run an online question and answer tutorial after you have listened to each pre-recorded tutorial. Your individual supervisor will let you know when they will be running this, so they will confirm to you the date and the time. So in terms of the online tutorial process, there will be 4 pre-recorded tutorials with slides such as this. Now the recordings in Canvas, so these relate to the question and answer sessions that your supervisor is going to run, is only available for 2 weeks. Now it really is important that you attend these question and answer sessions. If however, despite your best efforts you can't attend, you will have the recording, but it is only available for 2 weeks. Please see the detailed module overview for the suggested timings of the tutorials. These are aligned with what you're studying at the time and to ensure that you meet the critical path of submitting your ethical approval, your bundle of documents for ethical approval to your supervisor by the 18th of April. There are 10 preparatory study weeks which commenced 18th of March, and then subsequently there are 18 formal study weeks which commence the 27th of May, and that date is the formal start of the trimester 3 academic module presentations. Right, so tutorial timings and content. Tutorial 1, you know what we're covering there. I've already shared the agenda with you and we are nearly finished. Tutorial 2, we're going to talk about opportunity identification in some detail and ongoing stakeholder engagement. We'll talk about undertaking a literature review. We'll revisit the ethical approval process, and we'll talk briefly about scheduling a creative problem-solving workshop. And the creative problem-solving workshop links to stakeholder engagement. So tutorial 2 you should listen to in week 2, preparatory study week 2, week commencing the 25th of March. Tutorial 3 you should listen to in week 9, week commencing the 13th of May. And the focus there is going to be on creative problem solving, providing you with an overview, a detailed overview of the process, what actually is it, and running a creative problem solving workshop itself. Then tutorial 4 happens during week commencing the 3rd of June, which is during study week 2. So it's not the preparatory week, it's study week 2. And here you will look at research methods and design in more detail, and we'll take the opportunity to talk about the project proposal and overview project proposal and plan overview, which is due by the 19th of July. So we'll talk about that in some detail. Now, work-based learning and action research is the focus of topic 1. It's important to have an understanding of what action research is. Effectively, it is situated learning, learning that happens in the workplace, about the workplace and for the workplace. And as you can see in the second definition offered by Cohen, it's typically a small-scale intervention which involves systematic, close examination and monitoring and review of the effects of such an intervention, combining importantly systematic action, deliberate action and reflection to improve practice within the real world being your organisation. Now, there are lots of definitions of action research, and this is all detailed in the online module material. But for example, action research combines diagnosis, action, and reflection, focusing on practical issues that have been identified by participants and which may somehow be both problematic yet capable of being changed. It can also be considered to be requiring systematic planning, acting, observing and reflecting in a manner that is much more demanding and rigorous than in the everyday course of life. So it's not just normal reflecting and acting, it's deliberate reflection and action. And in regard to participants, in the first definition, this relates to key stakeholders, links to the concept of community of practice. So in terms of action research, in terms of the process of deliberate action and reflection, it is an iterative process where there are cycles of inquiry. So we start first off with defining the issue and observing and collecting the data. We plan the intervention or the action. We undertake it, reflect on it. We report our findings, and then we undertake the same process once again. So that's very much what the process is going to be for you in undertaking your projects, completing one or more cycles of inquiry. Now, in terms of research approaches, at the end of this tutorial, I'm going to represent this slide, and you should click on the link provided below. This is a very useful introduction to the classical research approach versus an action research approach provided by one of the supervisors on this module, Martin Spall. Now you'll note that Martin in this recording talks about two supervisors on the audio recording. This refers to the presentation of this module last year. During the presentation of this module last year, there were only 2 supervisors, myself and Martin. During this presentation, of which you are part, there are, as you know, 6 supervisors. Right, just coming to an end now. We've only got a few more slides to talk about. As mentioned already via a couple of emails to you, it is highly recommended that you purchase a book by Coghlan and Brannock doing action research in your own organisation. Unfortunately, this is not available for the library to purchase as an e-book. So if you could purchase a copy, it doesn't matter if it's not the 4th edition, an older edition is fine if you can find a second-hand copy that is inexpensive. Now, in terms of stakeholder engagement, early stakeholder engagement is critical to help you identify an issue or opportunity that is worthy of your focus and that will add value to the organisation. Now, note that stakeholder engagement is a dialogue. It is not a one-off process. It is an iterative process. In engaging with your stakeholders, consider their relative power and interest. And as part of your engagement with stakeholders, development of a community of practice, which is one of the marking criteria in the assessment, you will be running a creative problem-solving workshop after ethical approval has been granted. Tutorial 3 will cover this in more detail. I would suggest you consider appointing a mentor to provide support to you within the organisation. I think of a mentor as a gatekeeper. They can open doors for you. They are a sounding board, a safe sounding board. Normally, you wouldn't have your mentor as your immediate line manager, but there have been occasions where this is appropriate. Right, time management. You received early communication in January about commencing entrepreneurial action early. This was to ensure that you started managing your time effectively on the trimester 2 module you were due to start. Hopefully you have managed to achieve that. You have got, as I said at the start of the tutorial, an awful lot of work to do in the coming weeks to ensure you are on target to submit your application for ethical approval to your tutor by the 18th of April. So you do need to identify how you're going to free up the time you need, what sacrifices you're going to make, and I assure you, investment of this time early on will make your study, your project, and the outcomes all the more effective. As denoted in the slide, reality can often be quite different from the plan, so you need to regularly throughout this module be reviewing how you were doing to date. And if you get behind, make sure that you identify how you're going to catch up again. Now, please keep an eye out for the teaching announcements that I will be posting regularly. After the 29th of March, you will have a dedicated area with your supervisor, so they will provide a further guidance and support to you. It's important that you think about what sort of help you need from your supervisor and how you can best utilise their expertise. You are postgraduate self-directed learners, so you need to take responsibility for your learning. So draw on your supervisor's expertise, but note too they won't repeatedly chase you. Engage in regular dialogue with your supervisor. Ask if you need help, and be sure to heed the advice provided by your supervisor. And if you don't agree, that's an opportunity for discussion and an opportunity for further learning. It's imperative that you regularly access your Anglia Ruskin email address, because if there is a need to email you, your supervisors or your supervisor and the university will only use this email address. Okay, so if you don't already have a note of your supervisor's email address, it is here. So next steps. Your dedicated supervisor will advise you when they will be running their question and answer tutorial within Canvas based on this first tutorial. And you should please listen to tutorial 2, week commencing the 25th of March. Just a reminder of the key deadlines, all of which are UK time. And I'm going to move on now to the final slide, where if you please click on the link provided to listen to Martin's audio recording. This audio recording is 25 minutes long. You may now need a break because you've attended a tutorial that's run for an hour. Thank you for your time. Perhaps take a break, but please do come back and listen to Martin's tutorial. I think you will find it extremely useful. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you in tutorial 2.